From the field to the film room to the war room, we've got you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now. Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 48 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've seen him on the Tough Cover Pod. It's Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at @MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how are you doing this evening?
I'm happy to be here. This is a fun position group. We got a lot of the same names, but these are names that Eagles fans are going to want to get to know because these are definitely possibilities in the first round. So it'll be fun to talk about.
All right. And joining us as usual for these draft shows is the godfather of the Painted Lines. It is Dibes. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. Dibes, I couldn't help but notice that I mentioned the best co-host in the game. Mark was already waving to the people. He just assumed I was talking about him. How do you feel about
that? Love it. You guys kill it, man. Especially Mark on Tough Cover Podcast. If you want to win some money, go check out Mark Henry Jr., man. He is outstanding. And then I'm just excited to just break down arguably the second best group in the draft right outside of edge rushers, man. This class is stacked. We're talking about top 5 tonight. This could be a 2-hour show just on top 10 alone. That's how skilled this group is, man. It's deep. First round, second round heavy. You're going to see a run of wide receivers, and it is a terrific class. A class that you have no idea who's going number 1, who could go number 5. It is a really fun class.
Yeah, this is a very unique wide receiver class in that nobody really knows who's at the top. You can listen to 10 different podcasts and read different draft guides, and they're all going to order these guys differently. I mean, last year, Jamar Chase was wide receiver 1. 2 years ago, everybody had Jerry Jeudy as wide receiver 1, except for the the Las Vegas Raiders, I guess. This year, it's all over the place. There's guys that I've seen number 1 somewhere that's not even in my top 5. And so it's going to be interesting to talk about. We're going to break it all down for you guys. This is our 6th draft show. We've done edge, interior defensive line. We've done quarterbacks. We've done linebackers. I guess this makes it our 5th show. But we're going to get through them all before we get to the draft. I see Mark holding up a finger over there.
Real quick, I can't believe that disrespect to Oklahoma's own CeeDee Lamb, who was by far my number 1 wide receiver prospect in that class.
I mean, he was my wide receiver 1 too, but I feel like consensus number 1 was Jeudy.
No, you're probably
in that
right.
class.
You're probably right.
But I was swimming upstream and pounding the table, as I tend to do for my Oklahoma guys. But before we get into the wide receiver talk, though, we do want to touch on a couple of huge landscape shaping moves here in the NFL. The market, the teams have shifted. The landscape of the NFL has shifted. 2 big quarterback trades. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers re-signing with the Packers, but that's just about money. We don't care about that. But Russell Wilson traded to the Denver Broncos for a package of picks and players. I believe it was 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th-round pick, Drew Lock, defensive lineman, I can't remember the name off the top of my head now, and Noah Fant. And then they got like a 4th-rounder back in return, which
Shelby Harris, by the way.
Shelby Harris, that's right. I would love to. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to figure out how the Seahawks had to send a 4th-round pick. Like, is the Broncos general manager in there like, listen, I can sell this to Elway, but you got to give me a 4th-round pick? I don't know.
The rumors were that they really wanted Chubb, Seattle. So I feel like that trade got so convoluted and so many picks and players involved because I think Denver was like, we're not going to give you Chubb, and Seattle was like, well, if you're not going to give us Chubb, then you got to give us, Fant and Harris and an extra second and an extra first and like all this stuff. So I'm sure that I would love to be a fly on the wall of almost like any of these big negotiations, like how the Lions with staff, they were calling the Niners and they were calling the Rams last year. Like I think all that stuff's so interesting.
The most Seahawks thing ever would be to take that 9th overall pick and now draft a running back. But
please, as an Eagles fan, please.
So,
we need that.
Here's my biggest takeaway. The biggest loser in this trade is Noah Fant. Like, imagine that he hears it come out that, hey, the Broncos just traded for Russell Wilson, and he's like, yes, I'm done with Drew Lock. And then the management calls and he's like, hey, by the way, we're shipping you along with Drew Lock to Seattle. So my heart goes out to Noah Fant. That's a tough position.
Yeah. I kind of, this is a trade where it seems like everyone reacted yesterday and just made Denver a Super Bowl contender. Which to me, like I've been saying, I think Shane, I probably talked to you about this before, just talking openly about the offseason. Everyone was looking at Denver as this landing spot for Aaron Rodgers, where, they'll be a Super Bowl contender if they get Rodgers. And I've just never been as high on this Denver roster. They've got 3 names on defense to be excited about with Chubb, Surtain, and Justin Simmons. Besides that, there's nothing on defense to be excited about. And you lost Vic Fangio, who I don't think was a good head coach, but he probably was benefiting the defense while he was there. And then on offense, you've got pieces like Judy and Javonte and Cortland Sutton who can't stay healthy. You traded one in Fant. You have a terrible O-line. I don't know if this is just like a plug-and-play, ready-to-compete team. I think the Broncos are the 3rd best team in that division now.
Where does Russell Wilson rank among quarterbacks in the AFC?
Man, that's so hard to tell, though, because he started the year well, and then he got the hurt finger, and he struggled to come back from that. Russ fully healthy. I mean, I think he's still a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah.
But he's clearly the number 3 quarterback in that division.
Yeah.
I'm not going to – I mean, I don't think you can make a good faith argument he's – Carr is better. But Carr's still a good quarterback as well. The biggest thing for me, I think this is a terrible trade for Seattle. Like, they got far too little in return for Russell Wilson. I strung together what they gave up for Jamal Adams and what they got for Russell Wilson. They got the equivalent of a mid-first-round pick more for Wilson than they gave up for Jamal Adams. So basically, they traded Russell Wilson for Jamal Adams and a mid to late first-round pick.
But that's not the situation they're in right now. I think if you gave John Schneider a do-over, he would undo that Jamal Adams trade. But I don't think that you can use that trade to grade this one against it. I think they got a haul. You got 2 1s, you got 2 2s, you got a young tight end on a rookie contract in Fant. You got a solid D lineman on a good contract in Shelby Harris. Drew Lock's nothing. But 2 1s and 2 2s to me sounds like a lot for a 34-year-old guy to jumpstart your rebuild. So I actually think it's a great move for Seattle. But the problem is, nothing matters if you don't have a quarterback. So right. It can be a great move, and I think that it could probably be a smart move for Seattle. But if they don't figure out the quarterback position, then it doesn't really matter. But if they use that 9th pick to take Malik Willis, and Malik Willis turns into the guy, I think that trade makes a ton of sense, and you're loading your cupboard with a ton of extra picks, and I think that there's plenty of. I wouldn't just be like, I'm done being a Seahawks fan if I'm in Seattle. You have pieces on that team, and you just got so many picks. You have all your own picks now that the Jamal Adams trade's complete. So I think that Pete Carroll having a mid-70s coach in Pete Carroll and a GM who's been there for a really long time. Maybe I'd want to clean house completely and kind of rebuild with a whole new front office and a new coach and a younger coach. But, I don't think it's a terrible trade for Seattle. But, yeah, it doesn't matter if they don't figure out quarterback.
From Denver's side, I mean, Denver's drafted 3 quarterbacks since Manning left. I think they should be happy with what they gave up to go get Wilson. Although I will say, all they had to do last year in the draft was take Justin Fields. They'd have a quarterback on the 2nd year of a rookie deal, and they would have pick number 9 this year to go get a corner. They could go get a Sauce Gardner this year.
So you? Yeah, I was just going to ask that. You'd rather have Fields and all of those picks, and not Surtain and Russell Wilson. So I think that alone means.
I think their biggest mistake, and we talked about it last year in the draft, the biggest regret they were going to have, and Carolina, were taking cornerbacks when they had a clear need at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on where you're at on Fields after that year. I think this is a big year for Fields. Again, I don't think Chicago did him any favors last year, and I don't think they did him any favors this year by hiring a defensive coordinator as the head coach. But, if you have that opinion, I think that this means that this is not a slam dunk trade for Denver. If you're saying that you would rather kind of take a chance on a rookie quarterback from last year, take a chance on a young draft quarterback, and that option's still available for Seattle next year, and next year should be a good quarterback class in the draft. So I think that you could argue getting Surtain and then getting Russell Wilson would be a better move than that, but it depends on how close you think Denver is to competing for a Super Bowl. For me, I don't think they're that close, so I wouldn't have done this Russell Wilson move. It's kind of the same corollary for the million times we've talked about it with the Eagles. I wouldn't have wanted to do the Russell Wilson traded all move or the Aaron Rodgers traded all move because I didn't think our roster was quite ready to compete at that level. And I don't think Denver's is either.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And I put a poll out there because my co-host for Party on Broad, Rob, was all on board with Russell Wilson and trading and getting Russell Wilson in. I put a poll on the YouTube channel saying, would the Eagles be Super Bowl contenders had they traded for Russell Wilson? 74% have 1,500 votes said no.
All right. We got John Russell chiming in on YouTube, says, fun stuff so far, boys. Jamison Williams all day, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into our receiver rankings, but before we do, we briefly have to mention one other trade that went down, and that is Carson Wentz getting traded from the Colts to the Washington football team for, I think it was a pair of thirds and then a second-round swap. I think that was the terms. So Carson Wentz will be coming to Philadelphia next year to face off against Jalen Hurts. For me, that's just laughable for me that Washington would go do that. Washington's sitting here with the number 11 pick in the draft. Go get a rookie quarterback. You're paying $28 million and trading for a guy in Carson Wentz who was 26th in completion percentage above expectation last year, 20th in success rate. He was 19th in EPA per dropback. He single-handedly threw away the Colts' playoff chances against the Jacksonville Jaguars. There were 4 teams last year who had a higher rushing EPA than passing EPA. It was the New York Giants, who started like 7 different quarterbacks, the Carolina Panthers, who started 3 different quarterbacks, the Browns, who had atrocious quarterback play, and then the Colts. So I'll let you fill in what that says about Carson Wentz. I think Wentz is. I think he's better than Heineke, but I think the not the football team, the Washington Commies. I think they missed out on an opportunity here.
Yeah, for me, I'm actually a little bit higher on Carson Wentz at this point than consensus, which is funny because I would not have been, labeled as a Carson Wentz guy a year ago or last year in Philadelphia. But I do think that the reaction to the trade and what Carson Wentz is after those last 2 weeks, which is fresh in everyone's mind, I think it's a little strong. The one thing I will say is, with the lack of posturing Indy was doing, Indy was coming out and just saying, we're not bringing this guy back. Like, this guy's not going to be our guy. It's shocking that it took as much as it did for Washington to get Wentz. So I do think it's a failure and an overpay in any way that you look at it in terms of, value and draft capital. I think that's a joke that you gave up 2/3. By the way, one of those thirds, if Wentz plays 70% of the snaps, can turn into a second. So Carson Wentz snap percentages are back for this year. It's not, that's a funny thing. It's like never been a thing in the NFL for people to be tracking snap percentages as contingencies for trades. Carson Wentz has it back-to-back years. But I think it can be a good trade for Washington. I actually think they can win the division. I think they're going to compete to win the division. I think that they had some pretty bad luck with injuries last year across the roster. And they didn't give up that 11th pick. They still have some cap flexibility even after getting Carson Wentz. So they can plug some holes. They have Antonio Gibson. They have Terry McLaurin. They have a couple of veterans on the O-line. They have Montez Sweat. They have Chase Young. If they can kind of build that secondary, they would scare me as a team to compete with the Eagles next year. But like I said, the overpay is definitely massive in terms of, I don't know who they were bidding against. I don't know who was in the Carson Wentz sweepstakes, the sweepstakes in which Indy was telling everyone this guy stinks and we don't want him in the locker room. Like, it's a weird situation, but I do think, I am of course nervous that Washington's going to be like 9-5 at some point this year, and it's going to be like, oh, look at how dumb the Eagles are. But I feel great about the decision we made, regardless of what happens with Washington. But I don't hate it from a football standpoint. I hate it from what they gave up, I guess.
I go to Carson Wentz voicing his displeasure during the 2017 Super Bowl run. Did you guys see that report?
Yeah.
Like, what a freaking baby. Just what a freaking baby. It's not on the field. It's everything off the field. Just a terrible teammate, period.
Washington will be a good place for him to go because he's not going to have to worry about them having postseason success. So, okay, let's dive into our receiver. Dibes, did you have anything else you wanted to say on Carson Wentz? Are you ready to?
Oh, man, I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to see Carson Wentz versus Jalen Hurts, man. That's just like Terrell Owens playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, just pure popcorn entertainment.
It's like Ben Simmons playing against. Oh wait, never mind. But I think I'll give two hot takes on the way up before we go to the draft. Denver will miss the playoffs. Washington will make the playoffs. I hate to be that guy, but those are hot takes as of right now. Pre free agency.
Could you imagine?
Somebody clip this and you tag Mark in it on Twitter when Denver's in the Super Bowl next year.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I will say my Super Bowl right now, and this is going to make you happy, Shane. I don't know if you saw this tweet, but my Super Bowl right now is San Francisco versus the LA Chargers next year. Pre off season. That's where I'm at right now.
I'm patiently waiting for Jalen Hurts versus Carson Wentz in the playoffs, and Carson gets hurt on the first series, and we beat Washington. That's bank on that.
All right, let's throw it to our wide receiver rankings. This is what the people are here for. Dibes, you lead us off here. We're going to go from 5 to 1 through our top 5, and then we'll throw in some honorable mention, guys that just missed the cut, guys that are good late round prospects. Dibes, you kick us off here with your number 5.
Yeah, and just like I said to start out the show, I've got Garrett Wilson. Sorry for the misspell there. I believe there are 2 T's. Hey, I'm only human. But for me, Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State, just one of the premier slot wide receivers in this class, just incredibly advanced when it comes to a developed route tree and just creating separation off the line. He's got short area agility. He's going to thrive in any kind of like quick strike RPO type offense. And I think he's going to have really fast success in the NFL. He's got terrific lateral quickness, foot speed. He's elite when it comes to body control. There's no question that if you put him in the slot, he's an instant mismatch against linebackers, nickel defenders. That's how good this guy is. I think he ran like a 4.38 40 at the combine. He had a 36-inch vert, which is no freaking joke. Expect this guy to dominate on underneath throws, to dominate in the screen game from the jump. I've got him in the top 20. And to be fair, I think this guy could be the number 1 wide receiver taken in this draft. That's how much of a crapshoot this group is. He's that good.
All right, Mark, let's throw it to you because you've got Garrett Wilson as your number 5 too. So what do you see when you put on his tape?
It's funny because I see a little bit different than it seems like the draft community does, and even that you saw at that combine. That combine, he ran a 4.38, and like I've said, that vert was no joke. Daniel Jeremiah was shocked at what he did in the 40. He was expecting him to be a 4.5 guy, and he said even if he was a 4.5 guy, I think he was going to be like a number 1 or number 2 receiver in the class for him. And then he comes out and runs a 4.38. But when I put on the tape, I don't see a guy who like wows me with speed or breakaway speed or separation. That's just not. He's kind of, to me, like a jack of all trades, master of none a little bit, which is interesting because he was such a touted prospect coming out of high school, a 3-sport athlete, a 5-star prospect, and the number 2 receiver nationally coming out of high school. So this is a guy who he was a 3-year contributor at Ohio State. And he was, arguably their most productive or most consistent receiver this year out of 3 surefire first-round picks in him, Chris Olave. And next year, I'll just put it right now, next year's number 1 receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba, in the 2023 NFL Draft. Ohio State is loaded with receivers. And Garrett Wilson, to me, is the guy that kind of jumped off the tape the least of the three. When I was going back and watching Ohio State stuff to kind of evaluate him and evaluate another guy, and Chris Olave, that I'll get to, and I was walking away kind of being like, Garrett Wilson's not blowing me away, and Chris Olave is impressing me more and more, and every time I watch, I fall more in love with Jackson Smith and Jigba. But Garrett Wilson's a guy who's going to be NFL ready right away. He was a 3-year contributor. He's an athlete that can do it right away. There are some concerns with drops in kind of like in unexplainable drops in some situations where it's like, that's a weird drop right there. No one's near him. There's no footsteps or anything like that. We've seen other guys like that with Jalen Reagor and other people struggle with drops in college, and then it translates to the pros. But then we've also seen guys like Jamar Chase struggle with drops, and then it doesn't really translate at all. So who knows how much of a factor that'll be. But it's also another concern with him is that he's not going to be, he's not too strong. He's 6 foot tall. So he's going to struggle with longer and more physical cornerbacks in the NFL. And I don't know how many of those he saw in the Big Ten. So it's not like he was playing in the SEC, and it's not like he was playing. I don't have film of him against Sauce Gardner that I can go at and look at, or any of these Derek Stingley or any of these top corners in this draft. So it'll be interesting to see how he translates to the next level. But I just, again, this is kind of a guy I see as maybe a really high floor, but maybe not as high of a ceiling as everyone else seems to think as he has. But like Dive said, I actually do think this guy's he's trending towards being the number 1 receiver taken in the draft. And I think he's kind of trending towards being like a top 10 pick, which is kind of crazy to me. But, I still have him here in the top 5. So I feel like I just negatively talked about him for a while there. But it's just because I do find myself being a little bit lower than consensus on him. But like I said, he is a guy that's NFL ready.
The Jalen Reagor versus Justin Jefferson thing definitely has an impact on this ranking for me. Like, the polish definitely, I'm not going to make that mistake like I did before. The polish of Garrett Wilson is definitely noticeable, and that's why, I'm not going to make that mistake. This guy is legit, and I'm not going to, fool me twice.
we have him in the same spot. I was just I probably spoke more negatively. I'd be curious to see where he is in your overall ranks, because for me, I think he's right outside the top 25.
I have top 20.
Top 20? Okay, so you've got 5 receivers in the top 20.
Yeah.
You love this class. Let's go. Let's keep it going.
So I don't have Garrett Wilson in my top 5. As I watched him and kind of compiled my notes and things, and I ended up putting an early 2nd round grade on him. And then I started to research and look what other people were saying. And it astonished me to see him number 1 on so many guys' wide receiver lists. And so I thought, I must have missed something. And I went back to the tape, having looked at what the other people had said and trying to go see it on tape, and I just don't see it. The thing that stuck out to me the most watching Wilson is that he loses his feet a lot in his routes. He's slipping, he's sliding, he tries to be real fancy, juking around with his routes, and I saw him slip a lot. I saw him lose sharpness out of his cuts. I saw a guy that struggled to get off a press. His highlight reel is amazing, but he's got a lot of lows once you get off of that highlight reel. And so he's a guy that I think has a high ceiling. He's just got a lot of questions to answer if he can get there. And for that reason, with some other guys I'm really high on, I didn't even have him in my top 5. So he's in my honorable mentions there, but I thought I'd mention him since you guys just talked about him. So let me get to my wide receiver number 5, and it is George Pickens out of Georgia. Pickens is 6'3", 195 pounds. He only played 4 games this year. He tore his ACL last spring, and he came back basically for the last game of the regular season and the playoffs. So he played 4 games. He had 5 catches. There's not a lot that you can take away from that. But you can go back into his tape from the year before. You can see that he is a good route runner, and he can run the full route tree. This is not a guy that's limited to playing just in the slot or playing just outside. You can move him around, and you can trust that he's going to get where he needs to be. He's got a good release package when he gets pressed. He's able to create separation at the top of his routes, and he's able to use his body well to keep that separation and make contested catches. I don't think he's overly fast, but he's a long strider, and he can stretch the field because he builds up speed. He's not sudden, but he does build up speed. He's got really good hands, a tremendous catch radius, and he's a great blocker. He kind of plays with a nasty streak, which cuts both ways. There's lots of videos of him pancaking corners. He also was suspended as a freshman for an in-game fight. So he's a guy that plays with a chip on his shoulder. He's got that nasty streak. If you want an X receiver in this draft, and you miss out on Drake London, who we're going to talk about in a minute, George Pickens is your guy. And there's not really a lot of other X receivers in this draft. It's basically London and Pickens, and then a whole bunch of slot and Z receivers. And so I expect him to go late first, early second round, just because of the scarcity of X receivers, assuming that his ACL checks out for everybody.
For me, just real quick on George Pickens, is I had a Georgia guy from a Georgia Bulldogs podcast talk about George Pickens, and he definitely, obviously, like, he's a Bulldogs fan, so he's somewhat biased. But what his take on George Pickens was, this guy has a alpha dog mentality. He has that, like, not necessarily a diva, but kind of like what all the elite wide receivers, that mentality possesses. And he was really high on him, and that's just something to know.
Yeah, I think George Pickens makes a ton of sense next to Devontae Smith in Midnight Green. I think he's a guy that, I think we'll be doing a lot more mock drafts here live, and he's a guy I'll be targeting, trying to trade up in the top of the second round to go get. He's a guy who makes I think he's a perfect fit. I think he's even a little bit better of a fit than Drake London if he's fully healthy in terms of the value that you'd spend on him. So he's my number 6 guy outside of my top 5.
All right. So moving on to wide receiver 4s. Dives, why don't you kick us off with your number 4 guy? You're muted.
Sorry, guys. One of my favorite guys in this draft, Treylon Burks. If we were ranking overall, he's not there. But if we're ranking for Eagles, he's among the top of my draft list. Treylon Burks is terrific. Just a great playmaker. He projects as an X receiver. I don't think he's going to have any difficulty creating havoc in the slot, in the backfield. He's got a huge frame, and he knows how to use it. He does an excellent job using his size and strength to shield defenders, adjust to the ball, and punish defensive backs at the catch point. I love how he has a solid burst. He can beat his man off the line, but he also has really good deep speed too, to get, go north and make a play on the ball downfield. I think he's obviously one of the best when it comes to those 50-50 balls. He needs to continue to develop his route tree. His 4.5 40-yard dash at the combine wasn't as great as I wanted it to be, but considering how big he is and how big his frame is, it's not disappointing. So he didn't really impress, but he didn't really disappoint on the other end. So his stock is not falling whatsoever. Treylon Burks is terrific. If this guy is available at 15, 16, 19, this is absolutely one of the guys in conversation for the Philadelphia Eagles.
All right, Mark, I'm going to kick it back over to you again here for reasons that will soon become obvious. But who is your wide receiver 4?
Yeah, I'm sticking with Dives. Me and Dives, great minds think alike here today. So I've got Treylon Burks here at number 4. 6'3", just an athletic freak. 66 catches for 1,104 yards and 11 touchdowns in 12 games with 22 catches of over 20 yards. And that's with a quarterback who, not as good as the other quarterbacks that the guys on the list we're talking about was playing with. So he was really the star of this Arkansas offense, no question about it. 22 catches of over 20 yards is, a lot when you're as big as he is. And, he ran a 4.5 40, but that didn't hurt his explosiveness on tape. And he has a ton of those big plays. Former 4-star prospect. He's a 3-year contributor at Arkansas. This is a guy who, the tape jumps out at you. This is the type of guy where it's like, whoa, he does some things, and they lined him up in ways that, you just saw it if you're watching the video on the end around right there. And they get him in space every way that they could at Arkansas. He's got quick feet. He can beat press or zone. You're not going to jam him up at the line of scrimmage. They used him almost like Debo a little bit in the backfield and on screens and on sweeps and on stuff like that. So, that's a lot of positives. His route running does leave a lot to be desired. There's not a lot of polish there, but I'm not going to get too bogged down with an athletic freak like Treylon Burks. because I've learned from my past mistakes with DK Metcalf, with AJ Brown. Those types of guys didn't seem as polished as some of the other receivers in their class. Obviously, DK fell really far. And I think that those two guys taught NFL GMs and me a lesson a little bit when a guy's just got such insane traits and such insane athletic ability. You've got to kind of ignore, if he's not the best route runner, if there are concerns like that, because that's something, if you get him into your system, that you should be able to teach if you're a worthwhile coach. And hey, there is a head coach in Philadelphia who used to be a wide receivers coach. So, maybe he could bring in Berks and really help him along.
All right, we got Rufus Rogers chiming in on YouTube, says, "What's up, guys? I want them to go hard after DJ Shark. If you can get him, Pickens is the only wide receiver I would want." And so we got another Pickens fan here, and Mark and I have actually talked about DJ Shark as a potential free agent target a while back, actually. I think before it was really kind of floating around a lot. So I'd love to see them go make that move.
DJ Chark, I love the DJ Chark move. There's a couple of other names out there. I think Russell Gage is an interesting name. They looked at Juju last year, so I imagine they'll take another look at Juju this year. It'll be more cost controlled too. So there's a lot of names out there that they could take a look at. I'm not going to limit them strictly to just an X receiver, strictly to just those types of things. And I know you didn't list Treylon Burks as an X receiver when you were talking about Pickens and London, and he's not, I guess, your typical X receiver. I honestly think you can use Treylon Burks almost any way. Like the way that they used him in the slot, they used him as an X, they used him on the outside. Like I said, they used him in the backfield like Debo. I think he's the type of guy where it's just however it fits your system is how you're going to use them. And I think he's the type of guy that can fit any system.
Yeah, I'll get to how I would use him a little later on here in the podcast. Let's move on to my wide receiver 4, a guy who lit up the combine. It is Chris Olave out of Ohio State. Olave is 6 foot, 187 pounds. In 12 games last year, he had 65 receptions for 936 yards, 13 touchdowns. He had 11 receptions of over 20 yards with 14.4 yards per reception. Now, he is a very smooth, fast, fluid player. I would say that Olave is the best route runner in the draft. He's got a great technical understanding of the position. He's a pure technician as he plays the game. He's reliable. He's got reliable hands. In fact, I see a lot of Devonta Smith in Chris Olave, a guy that's just so technically sound, so smooth in his routes. He's going to catch the ball. He creates a lot of separation with his routes. Now, one thing I did notice, he does struggle to make catches when that separation's not there. So contested catch situations or having to high point the ball, having to use his body to shield the defender off, that's not one of his strong suits. After the catch, he's just going to try to outrun you. Like, I don't think there's a lot more to his yak game than that. He doesn't do anything fancy. He's not going to run over you. He's just going to try to outrun you. And he can do that. He's really fast, as we saw at the combine. 13 of his 65 catches last year went for touchdowns. That's just an insane touchdown percentage. My view of Chris Olave, I think he's going to be a phenomenal number 2 receiver for a team. I don't think this is a guy you want to be your wide receiver 1. I think he's going to complement somebody really well. He can get open really easy, but he can't do some of the things that you want your alpha receiver, your X receiver to do. He's more of a finesse player. I do think teams might question a little bit that he was 3rd in his team in yards and receptions, although he did lead the team in touchdown receptions. I've got a first-round grade on Olave. I would not want him in Philadelphia. It's too much of Devonta Smith, and I think they need a bigger-bodied guy. But I do think Olave is going to make some team really happy as a wide receiver too. All right, let's roll on to our wide receiver 3s. Dives, why don't you kick us off here, and I'll just go ahead and throw it back up here because this is your wide receiver 3.
Chris Olave is one of the biggest winners of the combine here. 4.39 40-yard dash. Stellar series of field drills, man. Just was incredibly impressive. I think this guy went from being a lock for the first round to potentially being a top 15 pick in this draft. You nailed it, Shane. He's one of the most polished route runners in this draft. He's got excellent release, really great quickness. That 40-yard time kind of just reveals that he's going to have no problem lining up on anywhere on that field. And I think coming into this draft process, I thought of him more of a slot guy. I think he's going to have no problem lining up on the outside whatsoever. He needs to build up strength. He needs to, work on his blocking. But this guy is electric. I've got a top 20 grade on him, just like I do for Garrett Wilson. This guy is legit good. I agree. I would 100% would rather take Treylon Burks over Chris Olave if I was an Eagles fan. But if we're just talking general rankings, I would not, again, just like Garrett Wilson, I would not be shocked at all to see this guy be the first wide receiver taken in the top 15.
And that's one thing I feel like NFL teams have started to look at more. They've talked about building your wide receiver room like a basketball team, that you need different body types, you need different guys that do different things. And so it is important to remember, if you're listening, there's essentially 3 different types of receivers. And so that fits in a little bit. That's why, we're all fairly high on Olave, not necessarily on his fit in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Mark, why don't you take it away here with your number 3, who is also Chris Olave.
Yeah, you can leave him up there. And I agree with you to a certain extent on the fit in Philadelphia, maybe not being perfect. But I do think, maybe this is the 2K fantasy football, nerd in me, where there is an aspect of best player available to me. So if I have him right next to Treylon Burks, which I do, so I would say I have him graded higher than Burks overall, but I would take Burks on Philadelphia. Now, if I'm dropping down to a Garrett Wilson or a George Pickens, while I still think, maybe they're a little bit better of a fit, I think Olave is just more sure thing and more of just a much better prospect to me. So I would probably ignore the fit concerns at that point and take the best player available. But, that's the calculus of drafting. That's why we love talking about it. And, I think that eventually we'll do Eagles-specific big boards, and it'll be interesting to see how different that is compared to just our straight overall big boards if we're doing both. But, yeah, I've got Chris Olave as my number 3 receiver, 6'1" receiver, 65 catches for 936 yards and 13 touchdowns in his senior year in 12 games. He was a 4-year contributor at Ohio State. He actually probably should have left after his junior year. I think he probably would have been a first-round pick last year as well. So it's interesting that he stayed around, and he played on the outside end in the slot in his 4 years, and specifically this last year. And this last year, he had to change his game around, many other talented receivers. I already talked about that with Wilson. He had Wilson there. He had Smith and Jigba there. He had Marvin Harrison Jr. as the number 4 receiver, who ended up scoring 4 touchdowns in the bowl game. But in that way, he reminds me a lot of Jerry Jeudy, a different Alabama receiver. Another guy who had to deal with a crowded receiver room. Another guy who, while having a great senior year, maybe didn't take the leap that some expected in terms of the production. And Judy's another slender, polished route runner in the same way that Olave is. And we knew Olave was fast, and it jumps out on tape. But him running as fast as he did at the combine, and it was evident how that's going to translate to the NFL. He's patient in the open field, and he's a huge yak threat, and he can run like a running back at times in the open field, kind of in a similar way to Jalen Waddle last year. I remember saying he ran like a running back when he was in the open field. I kind of see the same thing with Olave, the way he follows blockers. I think he's the kind of guy who could fit on almost any team. Obviously, there's some teams where he'll fit better on for sure. But this is a guy who I think will complement whatever room he's in, and he'll kind of accent whatever the best part of his game that the other receiver in that room doesn't have. And I think that's what he did around Wilson and around JSN. And, again, with Wilson, it's kind of funny. The Ohio State guys, I think they both have pretty high floors and maybe lower ceilings than the other guys we're talking about on this top 5.
All right, on to my number 3. It is John Russell's guy, if he's still around the chat. It is Jamison Williams, the wide receiver out of Alabama. And if you guys are watching here live, be sure and drop us some comments. Let us know who you like. You can drop your questions. We love to interact with you guys. We can throw it up on the screen here. But Jamison Williams, he is 6'2", 179 pounds, which is light for that height. In 15 games last year, he had 79 receptions for 1,572 yards, 15 touchdowns, 19.9 yards per reception, and he had 24 catches of over 20 yards. This guy is fast, and he's tall, and he didn't run at the combine, but reportedly he ran a 4.4 in high school. He's run a 4.3 at Alabama. We'll see what his pro day time is, but he is lightning fast. Here's the thing, though. I went back and was looking around. Wide receivers over 6'1", under 200 pounds with a sub 4.4 40. There's been 8 of them in the last 20 years. None of them were first-round picks, and the best player from that group was Darius Slayton. And so this is an outlier body type and speed, and so I'm not sure what to do with that. On tape, I feel like he's an elite route runner, especially on deep routes. He's a very sudden player. Like, he can stop and start quickly. He changes directions without decelerating. I saw a lot of times that he kind of put a safety on skates and was right by him with some fakes. But despite all of that, this is still a guy, he'll take on contact over the middle to make a catch. So he's tough over the middle of the field. I did notice he can struggle with press, which is something Alabama tried to protect him from by getting him off the line of scrimmage, putting him in condensed sets and bunches, getting him off the line of scrimmage. And so that'll be something to look for in the NFL. Because of that, I think he projects best as a slot receiver, maybe a Z receiver once he kind of develops that release package. He is also a great special teamer, good kick returner. He had 2 touchdowns last year on special teams, and he was a punt gunner. So he's coming off an ACL tear in the national championship game. It is going to be interesting to see how teams evaluate the knee and what they think about that, what that does to his draft stock. But Jamison Williams, he's my wide receiver 3. I've got him pegged as kind of a slot/Z type receiver, and I fully expect him to go in the top 20.
Yeah.
All right, so let's recap here our top 3. Oops, I took it off the screen. Mark had from 5 to 3, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, Chris Olave. I had George Pickens, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams. Dibes had Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, Chris Olave. Dibes, who is your wide receiver number 2?
You just talked about him. Jameson Williams is my number 2, man. Just a smooth route runner. Just a guy who thrives at getting separation. I think he's got excellent quickness. This is a true downfield threat. You nailed it, Shane. Like, this is a guy who I think should be able to thrive in the slot at the next level. He's got some of the best speed in the class. His burst and speed should be able to take the top off many defenses at the next level. You look at this guy's ability to just punish defensive backs with double moves over the next 10 years. There is value to that in the first round, 100%. I think Jameson Williams' body control and ability to track the ball downfield is absolutely elite. I think this guy is a sure bet to make some, one of those like ESPN top 10 plays of the week catches downfield. But at the end of the day, it's all about vertical speed. I think this guy's 5th gear is so good that he deserves a top 20 selection in this draft. When he gets going, man, just watch out. He's a home run threat, just like Deshaun Jackson, anytime he's on the field. Defenses have to account for this guy's level of speed.
I heard somebody comp him to tall Deshaun Jackson.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Rufus asked, is him coming in at Todd Pinkston like 170 pounds
absolutely
scare you at all?
So wait, just a real quick thing on that. He came in at 179 after tearing his ACL like 3 months ago and not being able to work out. So he didn't come in at 170. He came in at 179. And also, I don't know. I don't know if that's a fair thing to judge him on. I think he's probably 185, 190 playing weight, which, most of these guys that we talked about are around 200. So I guess I often just care about wide receiver weights so little comparatively to a lot of people. That's why I was so high on Devontae Smith and others in the past. I mean, it's burned me before, but I guess I care about it way less than a lot of people do.
Yeah. All right. My wide receiver number 2 is Drake London. I've been high on Drake London for a while. He is now USC listed him as 6'5", 210. Which is
just real quick, BMI wise, like 210 is a lot more concerning for a 6'5" guy than 185 would be for a 6 foot guy. But I'm not concerned about that either. I'm just saying.
That's a major outlier in terms of height weight. Now at the combine he measured 6'4", 219, so he had put on a little weight. USC had him an inch taller than he really is. Doesn't surprise me. we'll see if he sheds that weight before he runs at his pro day. So I'll be interested to see the cat and mouse game. He plays with the weight there, but in 8 games, because he did sustain an injury and miss 4 games for the year. In 8 games, he had 88 receptions for 1,084 yards, 7 touchdowns, 12.3 yards per catch, and he had 18 receptions of over 20 yards. He was a really good basketball player in high school. He's got that background, and it shows. It shows up in his ability to manipulate corners onto his back hip and then hold them off with body positioning while he catches passes. If he is elite at anything, he is elite at committing offensive pass interference and getting away with it. Like at the top of his routes, he's so good at using his hands inside his frame subtly to create separation to get that corner where he wants him to be. He led the NCAA in contested catches with 19 catches, despite the fact he missed 4 games. So far and away the best contested catch guy in this draft. He is a good route runner. He excels at defeating press coverage, but he struggles to create a lot of separation sometimes. You've got to throw the ball into a tight window. You've got to trust him to make plays. He's got that build-up speed, so you can use him to stretch the field vertically. There are questions about his actual speed, though. Despite the type of player he actually was used on jet sweeps and stuff too, though, at USC. Forced 22 broken tackles last season. Now, largely it's running through guys because he's so strong, but he needs a quarterback who can throw with anticipation or is willing to just throw it up. Like he's an Alshon Jeffrey-like player that you just have to trust to go make a play. Now, the important thing for him, he didn't run at the Combine. He's not going to run at the USC Pro Day on March 23rd. He's going to have his own workout on April 5th at USC when he feels he's fully recovered from his broken ankle. His 40 time is key. If he can't get below a 4.6 40 time, he falls dramatically. He's going to fall out of my top 5. I need him. He doesn't have to be a burner. I need him in the 4.5s at least. Any slower than that, it's going to be a major concern for me, and I would probably take him off my board. But I think he's going to get into the 4.5s at least, and I would feel comfortable taking him. And I do have a question. Somebody messaged me on Twitter about Drake London, but Mark, I'm going to let you talk about him first, and then I'm going to throw the question to you.
Yeah, I also have Drake London here at number 2 out of USC, and when I'm pumping up a USC player and giving them credit, they have to be good. I am not a fan of the Trojans as a Notre Dame fan, but Drake London is a 6'4", 210 receiver who had 88 catches for 1,084 yards and 7 touchdowns in only 8 games before that ankle injury that Shane mentioned. He had 18 plays at 20-plus yards. He plays so much like a skinnier Mike Evans a little bit. Plays above the rim and is a former basketball star, as you mentioned. Averaged 29 and 14 rebounds as a senior in high school. Even tried to play at USC briefly. I mean, this is a guy that we're going to mock a lot to the Eagles. Maybe he could help out the Sixers a little bit, Dibs. But he uses that basketball experience to box out corners, and he's a great 50-50 ball guy. Definitely, like Shane said, the number 1 50-50 ball guy in this draft class that has a few good ones. And yeah, the fact that he led the nation in contested catches while missing 4 games is, with the quarterback play that he dealt with, it's pretty unbelievable. He was a 3-year contributor, and he's a 6'4", just like boiling it down. He's a 6'5", 6'4" guy, I guess. Now we know 6'4", not 6'5" anymore. I had 6'5" in my notes, but he's 6'4" guy who USC ran in the slot at times and ran screens and sweeps too. Like, it's unbelievable for someone of his size and athleticism. And there are concerns about his speed, but he's another guy when you watch on tape. I think that there's, I think it's a bit unfounded, and I also think there's a sliding scale of acceptability on speed when you're as tall and athletic as Drake London is. It kind of goes to the same thing I talk about with Jalen Hurts and running quarterbacks, where if you're so mobile and you're so athletic as a quarterback, the sliding scale of where you have to be as a passer starts to change. Like if you're Lamar Jackson athleticism and running the ball as a quarterback, it becomes, you don't have to be Peyton Manning in terms of throwing the ball to be a really good quarterback. I look at Drake London the same way. He doesn't need to be Tyreek Hill to be good at his size. I think he can be good just being a slightly below average speed wide receiver in the NFL because of all the other things that he brings to the table. There obviously are those concerns about his broken ankle. As an ankle injury survivor myself, my heart, I'm concerned as well. I'm always concerned about an ankle injury. Everyone pushes aside ankle injuries and everyone talks about these knees. And, maybe it's my bias because I'm still dealing with an ankle from like 8 years ago. But yeah, I think that there are concerns with my top two guys in the medicals, and we'll get to the next guy when I get to him.
Okay, so Mark, I had somebody message me on Twitter, and they asked me this, and every time I hear you talk about Drake London, I can't help but just hear the scouting reports on JJ Arcega-Whiteside. How is Drake London not J-Jaw 2.0?
Wow, that's a good question. I think he's good at football, so that's a good start there. But I think that, he was more productive than J-Jaw ever was by a long shot in terms of college stats. I know that people are going to throw that, he was at Stanford and J-Jaw did catch 14 touchdowns, but you look at over a collective span, Drake London was definitely more productive. And I think when you watch the tape, Drake London wasn't just relying on being taller than people. I think he was actually able to create separation at times. And like I said, USC did use him in separate ways. So I think a lot of the times J-Jaw got those touchdowns just because he was tall going against a 5'11" corner from Washington State. And I guess you could say the same thing with London because he's in the Pac-12. But I think the Pac-12, if you look at the corners, there's a couple of them in the top 10 this year. So who knows? I don't think that that's a fair comp, but, maybe I'm scarred.
I admittedly really like J-Jaw coming out of the draft. I liked the Eagles pick of J-Jaw. And, I just saw a guy that was just a contested catch machine. And I never stopped to ask myself why every pass that was thrown to him was contested.
Yeah.
At Stanford. Do I wish Drake London played in the SEC? Yeah. Do I really want him to run a 4.5? Yeah. But I do think, watching him, that if his contested catch ability does not translate, I think he's still a good route runner. And he's never going to create, huge separation, but I think he can create throwing windows. Now, if his contested catch ability doesn't translate, he is going to need a good quarterback that's going to put the ball into tight windows, a Matthew Stafford type that'll pull the trigger on those. If his contested catch ability does not translate, he may struggle with a Jalen Hurts type quarterback that struggles to throw with anticipation to throw guys open. And so I do think there's concerns. I think there's red flags there, but I always fall in love with these contested catch guys. And I do think there's quite a bit of difference in his technical skills compared to J-Jaw.
Yeah, I've been on that question for months. And there it is right there. A month ago, does J-Jaw's failure make you pause on Drake London? And look at that. Overwhelmingly, this is a Philly-based YouTube channel, and pretty much the majority of Eagles fans, 63%, are definitely no. And then you've got the added bonus of Nelson Aguilar's failure in Philadelphia, compounding that. So it's there. It's definitely there. But I'm of the frame of mind, every draft is different. You can't compare one guy versus someone 3 years ago. It just doesn't work like that. That's just my take.
So, Dives, why don't you tell me about your number one receiver, who might also be Mr. Drake London?
Yeah, I've been on the Drake London train, and I'm not going to jump off anytime soon. For me, my number one guy, just real quick, my 5 through 2, I had top 20 potential. Drake London, I have top 15 in my rankings here. I just think this is just that tall, versatile playmaker that goes so well with Devontae Smith. Moving him pre-snap, moving him all around the field, in the slot, on the outside. His ability to adjust to the ball. We know Jalen Hurts' struggles with hitting guys in anticipation, hitting guys with his accuracy. I think Drake London is the perfect kind of antidote for that. I think the NFL is a mismatched league, and I think Drake London has all the potential in the world to just be nightmare matchup against linebackers, against nickel defenders in that slot area. And I do want to see Devontae play a little more in the slot, but that doesn't mean anything because I think we can get a little bit of best of both worlds there. I think he's a really good blocker. No one really talks about that. He's got a really good base, and he's obviously got good strength and size there. And I think, like you said, Shane, everyone's waiting on that 40 time. Everyone's waiting on that 40 time. We'll see what it is. But for me, just pound for pound, one of my favorite players in this draft.
All right. Which brings me to my wide receiver one. It is Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. Burks is 6'2", 225 pounds. In 12 games last season, he had 66 catches for 1,104 yards, 11 touchdowns, 16.7 yards per reception. He had 22 catches of over 20 yards. Now, he ran a 4.55 40 at the combine, and everybody talked about that like that was just bad. But at his size, that is the 6th best speed score in the combine. It's higher than anybody else in my top 5 wide receivers. It scored out at 90th percentile. However, his vert was 20th percentile. His 3-cone was 8th percentile. So I wrote before the combine that I thought he was the most athletic receiver in this class. Looking at it again on the tape, seeing the combine numbers, I still see that. I see quick feet. I see a guy with burst who gets off of press. And so Arkansas's pro day was today. He didn't do those drills at the pro day. And so that's the last athletic testing that we're going to get on him. It doesn't make you pause a little bit. But I still think he is a risk worth taking purely because of the athleticism that's on his tape. And he's not technically nuanced in his route running, but he is physically dominant at the line of scrimmage. He played X and he played in the slot for Arkansas. He primarily played in the slot. He took some snaps in the backfield as well. I think you can move him around. I think you can put him in the slot. I would primarily want to put him in the slot, but I think you can put him at the X too. He was the highest graded wide receiver against single coverage by PFF since 2020. He had a 155.3 passer rating when targeted, which was the highest in the NCAA. And again, this is playing in the SEC. Even if he never figures out the route running, just throw the guy screens and let him go. He's a physical runner with the ball in his hands. He runs violently. He runs through would-be tacklers. Even if he doesn't ever become the best route runner, I still think the sky is the limit for this guy. So Treylon Burks is my wide receiver one. All right, Mark, who do you have? Round us out here. Who is your number one guy?
It's nice to have all three of us having a different number one guy. It's fun. I think it's the first time we've done that. So I've got Jamison Williams as my number one guy out of Alabama. And anytime I thought in the last couple of months about moving him out of the number one spot, I just want to play the play that comes to my brain that won't let me do it. So here I'll talk over it. And it's against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Every time I watch this play, I just think of the Superbad. The Superbad team is the fastest kid I've ever seen. It's the fastest kid I've ever seen in my life. I remember watching that live, and I was like, I can't actually believe what I just saw. Like, just the way that he was able to outrun SEC athletes on one of the greatest defenses in college football history. And the way he was able to get so open consistently against Georgia in that game. It reminded me of Devontae Smith and the way that Devontae Smith was just the boogeyman during that Alabama run, but in a different way. This is like in a Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle type of way. And you mentioned something, Shane, where you said if he doesn't run a 4.4, then he's an anomaly. I have less than 0% concerns that this guy is not only a 4.4 receiver, but I think he's a 4.3 or better receiver.
No, I was saying that guys at his height, got receivers over 6'1", under 200 pounds that run a sub 4.4 40.
Sub 4.4. Okay.
Yeah. Are very rare. There's only been 8 in the last 20 years. So he's definitely a height, weight, speed combination that's kind of rare. And typically it hasn't worked out in those 8 guys very well, but I'm so high on him too.
And this guy, I just think he's he's a completely different player than Devontae Smith, but I think he's kind of a code breaker in terms of what these guys do to the norms of the position of wide receiver. This is a guy had 80 catches for close to 1,600 yards with 15 touchdowns in 15 games, 20 yards per reception, 24 plays of 20-plus yard plays. Just an absolute home run threat in every sense of the word, a slender track star build, because that's what he was in high school. He was a 2-time state title winning track runner. All the scouts and analysts, and him, he'll tell you, seem to think that if he didn't tear his ACL, he would have beat the record that Taequan Thornton set at the combine for 40 time. And it obviously translated to the football field with his production at Alabama. Again, I'm kind of done worrying about slender receivers who kill it on Alabama at the highest level, if they can translate or not, because I think that this guy's skills so far outweigh the concerns about that build. And he's just got some of the craziest breakaway speed I've ever seen, not just in running fly routes, but in the yak department as well. He's a great athlete, a great route runner, can line up outside or in the slot. He tracks deep balls well, as he showed with helping Bryce Young win the Heisman in 2021. He also took 2 kicks back to the house, showing his elusiveness. I don't think we'll be seeing that, especially after his injury. But that just shows the type of player he is. And honestly, on tape, I don't see a ton of concerns, and I would have had him as a top 10 overall guy. But he did tear his ACL in the national championship, like we talked about, and he is so slender and is so reliant on speed that the medicals are going to be a huge concern. He's almost going to be a wide receiver version of Jeffrey Simmons from a few years ago, where people thought he was a top 5, top 10 talent, but had a big injury. People thought he might fall. Tennessee ended up gambling, taking a mid-first round pick, and they're still reaping the benefits of that, where they got a superstar player at a discount because of that injury. I think there's a chance someone takes a chance on Jameson Williams in the top 15 and reaps the benefits of that down the line. But I also think there's a chance that, we're not doctors. We're not going to get a chance to evaluate Jameson Williams' knee. So there's a chance that his medicals don't check out and he'll be a day 2 pick instead of what he was pre-injury, a top 10 pick. And Todd McShay has said it repeatedly, like, there's no way you can watch the receiver tape from last year and pre-injury say that he wasn't the most impressive guy. So I always find it hard pressed to kind of knock a guy off because of medicals. It's kind of why I was bullish on Landon Dickerson last year. It's why I've been bullish on other guys, where if I'm so bullish on a guy's tape, I'm not a doctor, so I can't knock him down unless I hear all these reports come out where it's like, oh, this guy's knee is, a serious problem. Well, then I'll kind of reevaluate, I guess. But for the time being, I can only go off of what I saw on the football field, and what I saw on the football field, is the guy who has no ceiling. I think this is a guy who can be a top 5, top 10 receiver in the world.
Rufus Rogers chimes in and says, I came in late, but do you guys want the Eagles to take a wide receiver in the first round or go after a Watson or more in the second round? For me, it's all about how the board falls. I want good football players. In an ideal world, I'd love to see the Eagles walk away from the first round with an edge rusher, a defensive back, and a receiver. But I'm not going to pigeonhole them into that if the board doesn't fall that way. So I guess my ideal scenario would be getting one of these guys out of our top 5s in the first round. But if the board doesn't fall that way, I don't want to reach for it. How about you guys?
The ideal scenario is the Eagles get a top flight wide receiver in free agency. We know that's not, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you look at Jalen Hurts, you look at, this, offensive scheme or heavy running offense. Wide receivers want targets. Wide receivers want stats. I don't know if you're going to get that with the Philadelphia Eagles. For me, this is definitely a position that's really deep. And this is definitely a position that you named, Rufus, one of the guys that I want to talk about for my honorable mention in that day 2 range. I think I'm good with waiting until day 2. I mean, you're nailed it, Shane. It depends on how the board falls, 100%. Jameson Williams, Treylon Burks, those are my top 2. I love those guys so much. If they're available 15, 16, or 19, that is 100% in play. But a guy like Christian Watson, a guy like that who's a 6'4" burner, dude, absolutely destroyed the Senior Bowl, absolutely destroyed the Combine, 4.36 40-yard dash, 38.5-inch vert, 136-inch broad jump, 98th percentile. This is a guy that can thrive in the slot on the outside, 6'4" at that height, and can play special teams, return kicks. I'm going to say it. I'd rather target edge, linebacker, and 100% cornerback in the first round. And give me Christian Watson on day 2. Easy.
So it's a really tough conversation. And like you guys said, it's all about how the board plays out, and just, giving you a glimpse into my rankings right now. I don't have a receiver in my top 15. And then if you shorten that to like an Eagle specific big board, I won't have an Eagle in my top, or a receiver in my top 10 in terms of my Eagle specific big board. So I guess you could take that to mean that I am valuing the edge, linebacker, and cornerback positions a little bit heavier for the Eagles. But for me, what it comes down to is I want to walk out of the first round if we make 3 picks with 3 of those 4 positions. I think that those are our clear 4 needs with edge, linebacker, corner, or, even shorten it to D-back because, Kyle Hamilton, Daxton Hill, Jaquan Brisker, leave those guys in. So even just make it edge, linebacker, D-back, and wide receiver. What I don't want is I don't want to take a first rounder on an lineman. I don't want a quarterback, and I wouldn't really love an interior D lineman either. So I do think wide receiver is absolutely in our top 4 needs. And then once you determine, those are our top 4 needs. I could be sold to rank those 4 needs anyway. So it's going to come down to how they allocate their resources in free agency. And it's going to come down to how the board breaks out. But yeah, I would personally rather take an Andrew Booth, a Devin Lloyd, and a David Ojabo, and hope that we can get one of these, like a George Pickens in the second round. That would be a dream of a draft. And I'm sure I think I probably sent you guys that in the last couple of days in my mock drafts. I think that actually is a perfect example of what I did. But I think that, there's a lot of receivers there. There's a deep class. We did a top 5 list, but like I've said earlier, we could do 2 hours on a top 10 list. So this is maybe a position where it's a little deeper than linebacker. It's a little deeper than D-back, even, I'd say. So maybe there is some benefit into waiting into the second round. But even just touching on that free agent wide receiver thing, it seems like they're all kind of staying in their spot. Like Williams is staying, Chris Godwin is staying. There's a ton of these guys that seem to just be staying where they're at. So there are other names that are going to be available, like Amari Cooper's and other names out there. But DJ Chark, we'll see what happens. But I would almost rather take a shot at like a DN like Emmanuel Ogba, or maybe a 1-year, 2-year short-term deal for Chandler Jones or something like that. Yeah. It seems like there might be a better value to be had in terms of bargain-wise in free agency on the defensive side of the ball, or maybe you sign a safety. I know Marcus May coming off an injury, he could be an interesting guy, but a ton of safeties out there as well in free agency, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so let's review our wide receiver rankings up here on the screen. Mark from 1 to 5 went Jameson Williams, Drake London, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson. I went Treylon Burks 1, Drake London 2, Jameson Williams 3, Chris Olave 4, George Pickens 5. And Dibes from 1 to 5 was Drake London, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, and Garrett Wilson. Now, obviously, like we've alluded to, there's a lot of receivers in this class. We've got some guys that just missed the cut. We've got some day 3 sleepers out there. We're going to shout out a few honorable mentions here, rapid fire, and I will lead us off. I'm going to shout out wide receiver Jahan Dotson from Penn State. He's 5'11", 178 pounds, had 91 receptions for 1,182 yards and 12 touchdowns last season. He is your prototypical slot receiver. He's a great route runner. He's smooth. He's got sticky hands. He creates a lot of separation. And he makes a lot of catches that a guy his size has no business making. He's very tough over the middle of the field. He only had 2 drops in 93 catchable targets last year. So good slot receiver. Can't put a guy like that in the first round, but I think he is a second-round guy. And then the other guy I want to shout out is wide receiver Skye Moore. Skye Moore is 5'10", 195 pounds. He was recruited as a quarterback, and then he switched positions to wide receiver in college, so he's new to the position. He runs good routes. Even if you didn't know, he just changed the position. So he's got a high football IQ. There's some technical aspects of his game that he can refine, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting, at 5'10", he had the biggest wide receiver hands at the combine, which is kind of crazy, a 5'10" guy. He dropped only 6 of 176 catchable passes in his collegiate career. Now, he doesn't have a huge catch radius, but if the ball's on target, he's going to bring it in. He also broke an FBS high 26 tackles last year, more with agility than true speed. He's kind of a shifty guy, not a top-end speed guy. I think his raw athletic score was like a 6.8, so just above average. But Skye Moore, I think, is probably a third-round guy that could also do your team a lot of good. Dibes, who do you have in honorable mentions?
Yeah, I already said Christian Watson. I think it's day 2. I think he's a day 2 lock now. I had him in my honorable mention in my top 10 rankings. And I had Skye Moore right outside of my top 10 rankings. I literally had him. I had all my notes ready to go, but I put him on my Senior Bowl watch. But yeah, Skye Moore's a fun player. I've got 2. Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati. Really good size, 6'3", 6'4". Just a freak athlete, 41-inch vert. This is a guy who is just great speed, good length, natural hands. He had a really good performance at the combine. I think he's a guy that could probably surprise some as a day 2 selection. And then my other guy is Taequan Thornton out of Baylor. Unofficial 4.21 40-yard dash, man. It's always fun to see these guys be the darlings of the combine, be the darlings of the Senior Bowl. Taequan Thornton, I'm sure someone's going to fall in love. An NFL team is going to fall in love with these guys and their measurables. So Taequan Thornton is definitely another guy on day 2.
I'm sure it won't be the Raiders taking him in the first round.
Exactly.
All right, Mark, what about you?
So for me, I mean, you guys stole, of course, a couple of names I'd use, but Jahan Dotson would definitely be a name I'd look at, and then George Pickens would probably be the top 2 names I'd look at. But a guy that's fallen a little bit for me, and definitely more so for the rest of NFL draft community after the combine, is David Bell, wide receiver out of Purdue, and he's a guy I still really, really like at 6'1". Just incredibly productive in college. He had close to 1,300 yards with 6 touchdowns on 93 catches in 11 games in a Purdue offense that was pretty much situated around him. He was the entire Purdue offense. And while he did run a 4.65, and while speed is definitely the concern with David Bell, he had 21 plays of over 20-plus yards, 21 catches of just big plays. And that's not something that would line up with a 4.65 40. So I think he runs a lot faster than he did in terms of on the football field than he did at the combine. So this guy is not some terrible athlete. He's a former 4-star prospect. He was a 2-sport star in high school. He was an unbelievable basketball player in high school. He won Indiana Gatorade Player of the Year coming out of high school. And then in his freshman year at Purdue, as a true freshman, he caught 86 passes for over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns in 12 games. This is just a guy who, as soon as he got on campus at Purdue, strapped on a helmet and started just mossing people and started catching balls. You will not find any concerning drops on this guy's tape. This guy's just a rock-solid prospect with one concern, and it's speed. And it's a big concern, and it's an important trait. I'm not going to say that it's not. But he checks every other box that you can see in terms of route running, in terms of 50-50 balls, in terms of, everything you could want to see a receiver do in terms of productiveness in college. He did it. But does he have the speed to translate to the next level? That's the question, and that's why he's not a top 5 wide receiver.
All right, there you have it, folks. It is our official wide receiver prospect rankings. This is our 5th show ranking draft prospects. We've also covered quarterbacks, edge defenders, interior defensive line, and linebackers. So make sure you check those out on the archive if you missed them. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode, ranking another position, breaking it down to get you ready for the draft. Dibes, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Oh, man, this is one of my favorite groups of the draft. I would not be shocked to see a major run of edge and wide receivers in the top 2 rounds of this class. It's going to be a lot of fun on draft night. By far one of the deepest groups, top heavy and depth wise. But I'm just happy to join, man. It's always a blast. Thank you guys so much for having me on. This is my 3rd podcast tonight, and I'm tired.
All right. Mark, how about you? Do you got any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I've just got a plug for myself, a cheap plug. So I'm starting my new radio show on Fox PHL, The Gambler, on Saturday on iHeartRadio. So from 11 to 1. I think even if Villanova makes the Big East Championship, but I won't put that in stone. But I think that it won't be canceled even if Villanova makes it. So if that's the case, tune in 11 to 1. I think Austin Krell will be a guest on that.
Yeah.
I think there'll be another guest that I'm cooking up right now as well. And I'm sure down the line, you'll see both of these folks, Shane and Dives, on there as well. And for me, it's going to be a lot this week about college basketball with March Madness coming into the swing of things on Selection Sunday. But after March Madness is done, we'll be focusing heavily on the draft on Saturdays, I'm sure, in April. So if you guys are just draft guys, then you definitely will have something to tune in with the Tough Cover show at Fox PHL The Gambler on Saturdays, 11 to 1.
There's no rest. Like, as soon as this NFL draft ends, like, it is full blown NBA draft time. Like, that is my baby as well. So
for me, it's funny, Dives, because I have like two of my babies going on right now at the same time. Like, March Madness is my baby. Like, I love the bracket talk, and this is conference tournament week, and it's unbelievable. Like, this is an unbelievable week for me, and the next week's even better. So, and then with all that, like, I'm sitting here filling out mock brackets that people are putting out, the bracketologists are putting out, and then after I get bored after 3 or 4 of them, I'm like, wait a second, I'm gonna go look at some mock drafts and be like, where's Garrett Wilson going today? Like, so it's funny. Like, I'm juggling both things at the same time. Not to mention, we're in WrestleMania season. My life is all up in the air right now.
What did that guy from Gonzaga do last night?
Who, Chet Holmgren?
Yeah. What were his numbers? I know it was a big game. I didn't know.
I'm not sure what he ended up with, but he's the fun thing. I just turned into an NBA draft pod. Shane's gonna
I'm about to remove both
out,
of you.
Remove us, yeah. But Chet Holmgren, I always remind people that I was in on Luka Doncic early. But the funny thing about that is I had Luka Doncic 1A to Mo Bamba's 1B because I thought Mo Bamba, the 7-footer that could block shots and shoot threes. I think Chet Holmgren's everything I thought Mo Bamba was going to be. I think that guy's going to be so fun. He's
so fun.
We got Rufus Rogers chiming in on YouTube, says, thanks, guys. Just like last year, easily the best draft talk on YouTube. We do truly appreciate you guys for stopping in, for chatting with us. It makes the show so much more fun. This will all culminate in a live draft show for at least the first round, probably day 2, just like last year. We'll be on live stream for 4.5 hours, however long round 1 takes, breaking it all down. So be sure and join us there. For my final thought, I just want to say I don't have any other babies. It's NFL all the time. That's why I'm so much better at this than Dibes and Mark. I don't have any hobbies. I have no free time. It's just all NFL draft all the time. So you look at our rankings, they're a little different. Just know mine are the best. So thank you guys for joining us for episode number 48 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, especially the part where Mark said Justin Herbert's going to the Super Bowl, be sure and smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at @halfandhalf_TPL. He's at Mark Henry Jr. Dibes is at Mr. Crockpot. So from me, from Mark, from Dibes, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.